My name is George Jared. I'm an investigative reporter and I'm also an author. I currently work for Talk Business and Politics. We're a media company based in Little Rock. I work from home. I live in Jonesboro. It says here my third true crime book will be coming out soon, but that's false. It's already out. I've won numerous awards with the Associated Press and Arkansas Press Association. And I don't say that to brag or anything, but apparently you have to credential yourself whenever you talk about a subject like this. I've worked for area-wide media, Arkansas Business, back in the National Bulletin. I spent 8 years at the Jonesboro Sun. My wife is actually a middle school science teacher in Walnut Ridge, and both my kids graduated from there. These are the 3 books I've written. The first one is Witches in West Memphis, and Another False Confession, The Creekside Bones, and then my latest book is Whispers in the Willows. Has anybody in here heard of the Rebecca Gould murder case? Okay. It was featured in the Hell and Gone podcast by the Discovery Channel last year. It was the #2 podcast in the United States. I was in 68 episodes for that. It actually got spoofed on Saturday Night Live, so it's a pretty famous case right now. I was there the day they found her body. I wrote about it. The missing poster that her mother handed me the day I found out she was missing is sitting in my car right now. And I also featured the Amanda Tussing case. I'm sure some of you guys remember Amanda Tussing back from 2000. And so there's never been an arrest in that case, but I'm pretty sure that a serial killer cop got her. And I wrote about that. How many people in here are familiar with the West Memphis 3 case? Okay, so basically everybody log over some very brief facts just in case you've forgotten. These 3 boys, Michael Moore, Stevie Branch, Christopher Byers, were out riding their bikes on May 5th, 1993 in their West Memphis neighborhood. Sometime late in the afternoon, early evening, these 3 boys vanished. Their family and friends spent the night looking for them. The next morning, their nude bodies were found in a drainage ditch in a place called Robin Hood Hills. The boys were tied ankle to wrist with their own shoelaces. This picture always kind of haunts me because there's a couple people here who know my son. Michael Moore and my son look very much alike, and they have the same birthday. Okay, and these are our suspects, which, so because of it was kind of like an overtly sexual nature of the crime because the boys were bound ankle to wrist. The police developed a theory pretty quickly that the three boys had been murdered in a satanic or an occult killing. And so within a month, they had identified 3 teenagers. Actually, they call them West Memphis 3. They should be called the Marion Three because they're not even from West Memphis, they're from Marion. Damian Eccles, Jesse Miskelly Jr., and Jason Baldwin. And the prosecution's theory of the case is that these 3 guys were out in the woods that day in Robin Hood Hills, and that the 3 boys had come down into the woods, and these 3 attacked them, and they sacrificed them in this occult ceremony. During the attack, they said that Jason Baldwin brandished a Rambo-style knife, and that he actually emasculated Christopher Byers, cut off his penis and his genitals. The boys were choked, beaten, sodomized, and then finally their clothes were removed. They were tied up and then they were drowned in that creek. Their clothes were found in the creek. The whole case was based on a confession that Jesse Miskelly Jr. gave. And so these 3 were tried. Let's see, Miskelly was tried, I believe, in Piggott. The other 2 were tried in Jonesboro in February, March of 1994. Okay, so now this was the case that was presented against them in court. Dr. Dale Griffis, an alleged expert in Satanism and the occult, testified that the day, May 5th, the fact that there were 3 boys and a lot of other numbers that were associated with the crime were indicative of a satanic or occult killing. Jesse Miskelly's confession was used against him, It was not used against Jason Baldwin and Damian Eccles at their trial, for the simple reason that at that point, Jesse Misskelley had recanted his confession, and he refused to take the stand against them. Because if I accuse you of a crime in this country, then you have a right in a court of law to confront me. Okay. The best piece of evidence that was used against Eccles and Baldwin was the testimony of two girls at a softball game. Shortly after the murders, these two girls were at a softball game in West Memphis. They said that they overheard Damian Eccles tell a group of people, Jason and I killed those three boys, and we're going to get two more before they catch us. The jurors in their juror notebooks said universally that was the best piece of evidence for them. There was some fiber evidence that was found, some microscopic fibers from like shirts and I think bathrobe that seemed to come from Jason Baldwin's house was found on the victims. And I will say this, Jesse confessed more than one time. He confessed 4 or 5 times altogether. And in every single one of his confessions, he said there was a violent sexual assault that happened to him. Victoria Hutchinson, she was mainly a witness against Jesse Misskelley Jr. She was a 30-year-old woman who lived not too far from the 3 teenagers who were charged. She claimed that she had attended a satanic S-spot with Misskelley and Eccles. She gave us testimony on the stand. Her son, Aaron, for a while, actually told the police that he witnessed the crime happen. And they thought that he was a very reliable witness up to the point of trial, but then they decided not to put him on the stand because they figured out that his testimony and statements were inconsistent with the facts. The Rambo-style knife that we talked about earlier was found in an industrial lake behind Jason Baldwin's house. I actually know somebody, a good friend of mine was actually there the day they found it. So the 3 guys are sentenced. Eccles, the ringleader, is given a death sentence, and the other 2 are given life without the possibility of parole. Now, the only thing that probably saved these 3 guys was a documentary film crew from HBO, and they filmed the documentary Paradise Lost. It was released in 1996, and when people saw this documentary, it started a furor. A lot of celebrities, Johnny Depp, Eddie Vedder, the lead singer from Pearl Jam, Natalie Mace from the Dixie Chicks, and Sir Peter Jackson, the director of the Hobbit franchise and the Hobbit franchise, donated millions of dollars to try to get these guys out of prison. And that's the front cover of that. I know what you're thinking to yourself right now. How is this youthful looking guy up here, how could he possibly been around when these horrible crimes happen? Well, I'm not that useful for you. So I started covering this in 2008, and what happened was they had what they call Rule 37 hearings. And in a Rule 37 hearing, it's kind of like your last-ditch effort to have your sentence overturned and you're asking for a new trial. And in Rule 37, and I won't bore you with a lot of the details of it, basically you throw everything up against the wall and say, okay, this is why this evidence should never be considered, this is why this evidence should be considered, my attorney was bad. You just come up with any excuse you can to try to get a new trial. Well, I covered one of the Rule 37 hearings. It was actually kind of a weird situation. I was like the 3rd in line at the Jonesboro Sun when it came to covering stuff like this. And I had gone to Highland because my daughter had softball game. And we had our main reporter who covered the West Memphis Three. He had covered it from the day that the boys were found. He got subpoenaed to a civil court thing. Our other reporter was covering another capital murder trial. So my boss called me and I snuck off to Highland. I don't know if you guys remember that horrible tornado over there in 2008. Well, there was a rumor going around that Oprah was going to show up and do one of her community, give them $50,000 to help rebuild their community. I don't know how much veracity there was to that claim, but I used it as an excuse to duck out of the office and go to my daughter's game. So I covered these Rule 37 hearings, this one hearing, this 20-minute hearing. Jason Baldwin was in there, Jesse Misskelley Jr. The first time I saw Jason, I thought to myself, wow, there's a child killer right there in front of me. So the hearing was very brief. Damien Eccles was represented by a guy named Dennis Reardon. And Dennis Reardon is he was Barry Bonds' attorney in the Alco steroids case. If money is no object and you're ever in trouble, I would suggest going to San Francisco and hiring Dennis Reardon. He's the best. So over the summer, there were more of these Rule 37 hearings, and these hearings lasted probably 3 or 4 times as long as the original trials. I'm talking hundreds of hours in the courtroom. And so I started having to cover them because the reporter who had originally covered it, he left our newspaper. And since I covered that 120-minute hearing, I automatically became the expert in the West Memphis 3 case in our office. So I'm in court one day, heading in, and you would not believe how many people would come from around the world to view these hearings. And I mean, literally, people would take vacations from like Philadelphia, New York, LA, Australia. I met a couple from Australia who spent 3 weeks in the United States, and all 3 weeks they spent were here at these hearings. So I met a couple, and they were, one was an attorney and his girlfriend. They were from Philadelphia. And, you know, I'm a pretty reasonable guy. The prosecutor tells me, the police tell me, these are the guys. You know, I believe them for the most part, you know. And so I'm out in the hallway during a recess, and the attorney's girlfriend is sitting with me. I believe her name is Jennifer. And she goes, "Do you think they did it?" I said, "Yeah. Why wouldn't I?" And she goes, "Tell me the best case against them." I said, "Okay." Couldn't think of anything, but immediately, confession. I said, "Confession." And she smiled at me. She goes, "Have you ever read it?" I said, "No." She goes, "Read it and come back here and tell me what you think." I said, "I will." So I went back to my office that day, and I had a file folder probably this big, so I dug through it. I found the first confession. I couldn't believe it. Could not believe it. My son was 8 years old at the time, and I guarantee you he could have told a better story without knowing anything about the case than Jesse Miskelly Jr. told. So I started having some very, very serious doubts. Now let's go back to the case that was presented against him first. So Dr. Dale Griffis tells the jury that this is a satanic or an occult killing. What would you believe that Dr. Dale Griffis, how he got his credential as a doctor? He ordered it online, or not online, he mailed it in. He wrote a check, sent it in, they sent him a diploma. He's also written a book about all these crazy conspiracy theories involving 9/11. So he got his degree from a diploma farm, or whatever you call it. So he should never be credentialed as an expert witness, ever, because he's not. Jesse Miskelly Jr. confessed 4 or 5 times, and you sit there and go to yourself, man, he confessed 4 or 5 times. Well, here's the thing. In the first confession, he said that the boys died at 9 o'clock in the morning, that they were on their way to catch the bus on I-40, and that they were tied with ropes, that they were brutally choked, and there's a key to that they were choked, that they were sodomized. And then, of course, we know all of those things are false. If you look at their autopsy reports, they were not choked. Their necks were uninjured. And we're going to get to the sexual assault here in a little bit. As far as the ropes, they were tied with their own shoelaces. I can guarantee you anybody would know that detail. Also, he had a really hard time describing the area where the boys were found. He got a lot of geographic things that you would know, like there was a pipe that led in, and there were trees in certain places. He had no idea. Now let's go to softball girls. Those softball girls could not identify Damien Eccles in a police lineup after they said that they overheard it. That was not allowed, and Judge Burnett did not allow that to be presented in court, that they couldn't identify him. Also, the girls could not say what he said before or what he said after, because they said they were about 40 feet away from him. Another thing is, and this is just a common sense thing, and I'm sure this is going through your mind right now, if Damien Echols told a group of people that he had, and they said 6 or 7 people, that he had killed those 3 boys and were going to kill 2 more, what are the chances that at least one of those people who was in that group wouldn't have stepped forward now and say, yes, I was a part of that conversation, he did say that? Why wouldn't you? This is the most famous criminal case of this era. And then there's another problem. One of the girl's moms says she lied. She thinks her daughter lied. And the prosecutor in this case now, when he let these guys go, even told me that that evidence probably would not have been admissible in court. The fiber evidence. Fiber evidence is junk science. We thought it was good science back in the 80s and 90s, but it turns out it's not, because it turns out anybody can go to Walmart and buy anything, therefore they can have any type of fiber on your body. Just being in this room, you and I and everybody are going to exchange fibers. Violent sexual assault. Jesse Misskelley Jr., through his several confessions, started to get some details right. And you say to yourself, okay, well, he started getting details right because he started telling the truth. Or he started learning more as his trial went on. And I talked to his attorney about that, and he goes, yeah, he learned more and more and more. But there's one thing he consistently said every single time that is absolutely factually incorrect. That there was a violent sexual assault. And we will get to that in a little bit. Victoria Hutchinson attended the Satanic S-Spot with Echols and Misskelley. She looked me straight in the face and said, I lied. The police had me for a credit card fraud charge, which, by the way, was dropped. And she testified. I literally watched her cry as she was heading into the courtroom, and she said, I'm the reason they've been sitting in prison for all these years. When she walked into the courtroom, there was a hush. John Mark Byers, I'm sure if you guys are familiar with this case, I was sitting 1 row away from him, and he literally said, and I quote, that's the bitch that started all this. Judge Burnett would not allow her to testify at the Rule 37 hearing for one simple reason. They could not determine if she had committed perjury in 1994 or if she would be committing perjury now. Of course, I told one of the deputy prosecutors, you can easily get away from that. Give her immunity. That's all you have to do. She never testified. The knife. Even when I thought they were guilty, I had a real problem with this knife. Through the years, I've covered a lot of things that involve water. Things are hard to find in water. Okay. There was a case over in 2012 where a little boy had fallen off a bridge on the South Fork River, and they found his body within 100 feet of where he fell in. It took them 4 days to find him. I'm talking crews were scanning that river left and right. The river was very calm. It's hard to find things in water. They found that knife in 30 minutes. And how they knew to look for the knife was the prosecutor had a hunch 7 months after they had been arrested. Even the reporter who covered this in my office told me, and he thought those guys were guilty. He told me, he said, the strangest part of it to me was we were told where to stand to take the picture of him coming out of the water with the knife. And we're talking about an industrial lake. I think that speaks for itself. You can imagine what's in an industrial lake behind the trailer park. Well, I guess this slide. Okay. These looked really pretty when my daughter did them earlier. I don't know what happened to all the words, but anyway, this is Dr. Warner Spitz. Dr. Warner Spitz is one of the preeminent forensic pathologists in the world. Dr. Spitz was on the Assassinations Commission for JFK and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He has written, if you're going to become a forensic pathologist in the United States, you're going to read books that this man has written. Dr. Spitz testified at the Rule 37 hearing. He walked in, he had a very thick German accent, carried a stack of books with him everywhere he went, walked with a limp, but when he got onto the stand, he absolutely destroyed the prosecution's case. See, remember we were talking about the knife, and they would show all these wounds on the body. Well, one of the biggest problems they had was in all 3 boys, there was not one bone-piercing injury. It was like they were scraped, and they had little, like, superficial bruises and stuff like that. Spitz argued, and I think very effectively, that most of these injuries were post-mortem, that they happened afterwards. They were the result of animals predating on the bodies. And so, and in fact, there's one section of it. I was actually just going to read. Anyway, so Dr. Spitz refuted the testimony for the prosecution, and he also took a shot at Dr. Frank Peretti, the state medical examiner. Spitz argued that his conclusions should not be, his conclusions didn't have a lot of gravity with him because Spitz had refused to license Dr. Frank Peretti in Maryland and Michigan. These were 2 other states where he could have licensed Peretti. Peretti came to Arkansas and became the medical examiner for the state of Arkansas. And to this day, I don't think he actually licensed as a forensic pathologist. And I'm not taking a shot at Dr. Peretti because I've seen him in court in other cases, but that's just a fact. Okay, and this is Dr. Michael Baden. He was a medical examiner for the city of New York for 11 years. He was also on the Assassination Commission for JFK and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He argued that the wounds to the bodies were caused by turtles. And they blew up these very large pictures of the wounds, and almost all the wounds were triangular. And he said this was, and he testified for an entire day about how, and he went through very graphically and described all these wounds, and even to an untrained eye like mine, I could see what he was saying. Well, the prosecution's argument to this was, well, how do we know there were turtles in this wooded area with a creek? So then, one of the defense attorneys put John Mark Byers on the stand and said, were there turtles in this area? And John Mark Byers said, yeah, the hill right next to the creek is called Turtle Hill. They congregate up there. This is Dr. Richard Subrin. He is a forensic oncologist in Miami-Dade, Florida. He has been practicing for over 40 years. He is a bite mark specialist. And right underneath him, you'll notice our good friend Ted Bundy, the serial killer. Dr. Subrin was the key witness against Ted Bundy in Florida in the Chi Omega sorority killings. He's the one that ID'd Ted Bundy's bite marks on the bodies. Dr. Subrin, and I will read a passage from him, was trying to be as nice as he could to the police, prosecutors, and experts who testified for the prosecution. But he was absolutely floored by this case. I mean, literally, he grabbed me by my shoulders when I talked to him, and he said, I cannot believe you guys are doing this in the state to people. And I asked him, I said, so what do you think about the prosecution's theory? He said, no, it's not possible, he said with an amused expression. None of this makes any sense. He told me he was 100% sure the injuries to Christopher's pelvis region were caused by animal predation. Urine and blood typically trigger an animal's response mechanisms, he said. I asked how this case compared to ones he'd worked in the past. Dr. Subrin smiled and adjusted his glasses. He spoke respectfully to the police, prosecutors, and even Peretti, who he vehemently disagreed with in nearly every regard. But in the case brought against the West Memphis Three, it was one of the worst injustices he encountered in more than 40 years of working criminal cases. It is incomprehensible, the doctor said. During the Eccles-Baldwin trial, prosecutor John Fogelman held a grapefruit in one hand and a Rambo-style knife in the other. He pierced the fruit with the knife and showed the resulting imprints to the jury. The prosecutor argued the boys had similar marks. Fogelman's actions in this instance should have resulted in a mistrial, Subrin said. He's not a forensic expert, and his example was tantamount to expert testimony without a cross-examination. It was bad science in Subrin's opinion. That is the most ridiculous statement I've ever heard anybody make, he said, and to sell that to a jury is unconscionable in my opinion. I mean, come on, you stabbed with a knife. There are no stab wounds on these bodies. What happened was at the close of Eccles-Baldwin is Fogelman had taken a grapefruit with that same knife, and he had made some indentations on the grapefruit. And Dr. Subrin is correct. At that point, the judge should have declared a mistrial. He was introducing evidence that the defense was not allowed to cross-examine, and he's not an expert, that being John Fogelman. And also, as Dr. Subrin said, you're not going to sit there and scrape a victim with a knife. You're going to stab him. Now, remember when Jesse Miskelly Jr. and all 5 of his confessions, 4, how many it is, I can't ever keep up with how many times he confessed. Remember, in each one of them, they said there was a sexual assault. This is Dr. Janice Ophoven. She is a pediatric forensic pathologist. She's the best in the world. In graphic testimony, they blew up 3 pictures of the boys' anuses, and they put them in the courtroom. There was not a bruise, wound of any kind. There was no semen found, and there was no presence of like an STD. Those are the 3 the 3 things you would look for. She said it's absolutely incomprehensible that those boys could have been sexually assaulted in the manner and there not be evidence. There was no evidence of it. And you know who agreed with her? Dr. Frank Peretti, the state medical examiner. But what he did when he was on the stand in the original trials is he left the impression with the jurors that it was possible to commit this act without evidence. She was very unforgiving of Peretti in her statements. She said that Peretti sufficiently collected enough evidence according to Ophoven, but his conclusions are mind-boggling. She considers his interpretations to be a violation of responsibility. Okay, I'll get you more on that. So here's the thing. If Jesse confessed, okay, let me explain something about confessions. So, okay, when you come to a crime scene, there's a lamp knocked over here, there's a shoe missing there, there's blood splatter on this wall. There are so many things that an investigator has to tie together. Now, in a confession, there's some things you can never figure out. It don't matter. You can be the most seasoned investigator in the world. There's some things you're still not going to be able to figure out. In a true confession, the confessor comes in and says, "Okay, that's why that lamp was laying like that. That's why this was here. That's why that was there." So they give clarity to the crime scene. Jesse did none of that. In fact, he got everything wrong. And the one thing he continued to get wrong was that there was sexual assault. And that's important because A, that's not a detail you can miss or would miss. And B, it's what everybody thought at the time. Now through time, we've learned that they were not sexually assaulted, but everybody thought they were, including their own the defense attorneys thought they were too. Okay. I think everybody would kind of understand this concept. If you're a defense attorney, the first thing you want to do after trying to prove that your client is innocent, the very next thing you're going to do, it's like 1A and 1B, is you want to give the jury someone else to think about. Okay? This is Terry Hobbs. He's a stepfather of Stevie Branch. And let's see here. Okay, and this is just a picture of me interviewing Damien Nichols on death row back in 2010. Damien actually wrote me a letter, and I went down and interviewed him. This was about a year before they got released. And while I was talking to him, we started talking about some of the new evidence that had started to pop up. Okay, so let's start with FBI statistics. What do you think the chances are that when a child is murdered, it's either murdered by its parent or a step-parent? About 99% of the time. That whole that fear that parents have, that irrational fear that some stranger's going to snatch at their kid, that's what it is. I mean, they're just as likely to get hit by a meteorite as they are to get snatched at by a stranger. So the FBI statistics tell us from the beginning the primary suspects in the case should have been the parents and step-parents of these 3 boys. They should have brought them all to a room. Terry Hobbs, the man I just showed you a picture of, was never originally interviewed by the police. there was a hair found on Michael Moore inside one of the ligatures that bound him. That hair is almost a certain genetic match for Terry Hobbs. Now, secondary hair transfer isn't the thing. Like I said before about the fibers, we're all in here. We will exchange hairs, okay? The problem is that they found another hair at the crime scene too. The crime scene, they found the hair for a guy who Hobbs said he was with that day, a guy named David Jacoby. Now, that hair is less of a certain match. It's not, but it's like 1 in 125, meaning 124 times it would be his, at the 125th time it would not. But his hair was found at where the bodies were found, and his alibi witness says, no, we were not together when the boys vanished. So already you have a competing story. Hobbs is been taped saying they were together. The alibi witness says he's not. How do you think that would play out in courtroom? If you're a jury and you're seeing that go on, you're going to start to have doubts. Stevie's pocket knife. In the original police report, his mother said that he would have this particular pocket knife that his grandfather had given him. The knife was never recovered. Pam Hobbs, the mother, found the knife in 2003 in Terry Hobbs' possessions. He knew that she was looking for that knife. She told me that she hit him in the head with a lamp because she said she knew then that he had something to do with his murder. John Mark Myers. So we kind of associate these characters as kind of knowing each other if you've watched the documentaries. But John Mark Myers, the day he met Terry Hobbs was the day that the boys' bodies were found. They didn't know each other. So they got, through the years, they got to talk and they got to kind of know each other. Well, John Mark Myers started having some suspicions that Terry may be involved. So he decides to concoct a story where he tells Terry Hobbs, he's just talking to him one day, he says, you know, maybe the person, maybe it's not these three guys, maybe they didn't, the person who killed these boys, maybe they really didn't mean to. You know, it was just an accident of some kind. And Terry goes, yeah, like a drunk driver, that person wouldn't be an evil person, they just made a horrible mistake. Really? So I asked John Mark Myers about that statement, and he said it's true. He said, I couldn't believe he said it. Terry Hobbs, during the same time, also told Pam Hobbs, his wife's sister, that he worked in a meatpacking plant. Remember how I told you that the boys were bound? They were bound ankle to wrist. That's called hog tying. That's how you hog tie in a meatpacking plant. So he admitted that he knew exactly how to do that. Also, Terry has a nephew who signed a sworn affidavit saying that he overheard his uncle talking about how bad he felt about killing those boys. The nephew also had a friend who heard the same statement. He also signed a sworn affidavit saying the same thing. Okay, so the day that the boys disappeared, Terry Hobbs has said repeatedly that he did not see those boys that day. 3 witnesses, 3 women on their way to church, said that they witnessed him motion the boys into the house around 6:30 that night. The 3 boys that actually walked through these witnesses' yards, one of the girls was a teenager, told Christopher that his brother was looking for him, and Christopher told her, you can't tell me what to do, you're not my boss. And then the 3 of them walk up the street, Terry Hobbs motions them in the house. That is the witness statements from 3 women on their way to church. Those statements were not allowed to be a part of the Rule 37 hearing. Judge Burnett would not allow them in. Hobbs has a lengthy criminal history. He tried to sexually assault a 60-year-old woman in her house because she threatened to call the police on him because he was beating his first wife up and his son. He's got numerous drug convictions and etc. So, and this is a good tutorial for people who don't understand how the law works. So Natalie Maines in 2007 came out and said Terry Hobbs was the true West Memphis 3 killer, so Terry Hobbs decided to sue her. Well, I'm going to give you a piece of advice. You can sue anybody for anything, but the first thing you have to prove in a court of law is that what you're saying is true. So what happened is a lot of this stuff that you see up here now got into a federal courtroom because he decided to sue her, because she got to depose him. So for the first time ever, he was actually interviewed on camera. So he got interviewed, and all of his inconsistencies about where he was at, what he was doing, all this other stuff, finally saw the light of day. And here's the thing. He lost that lawsuit. The judge ordered him to pay her $22,000. And here's the thing, this is the most astonishing part of this. So, in a civil case like this, it's 5149, meaning it has beyond a reasonable doubt. It's just a reasonable doubt. They had 3 guys in prison for the crime, and in federal court, he couldn't prove he didn't do it. It's astonishing. Okay, so finally, in August of 2011, these 3 guys were finally released from prison. I was there that day. I was actually sitting in the jury box when they were actually let out. Eccles moved to New Zealand for a while. He lived with Sir Peter Jackson. Jason Baldwin moved to Seattle and then Austin, Texas. And Jesse Miskelly Jr. went right back to the same trailer that they picked him up from, that he lived in whenever he was originally arrested. Okay, so I actually took this picture, by the way, of Johnny Depp and Danny Eccles. So in 2017, in April, we were going to execute, you guys probably remember, we were going to execute 8 people in like 14 days, some crazy, because the drug cocktail that we used to kill death row inmates was about to expire. So I'm at the Capitol, they're having a big rally to stop this thing from happening. I look underneath the tree, I see Damien Eccles standing there with Johnny Depp and Lori Davis's Eccles' wife there kind of in the background. And the reason that Damien Eccles had come back to rally against this was because he would have been one of the 8 that would have been executed. And so he was back to advocate for them. And I covered I was there for 3 of the 4 executions on death row during that time. It's hard, the death penalty is a hard thing for me. Because on a given day, if you ask me, I would say I probably prefer our government not picking and choosing which citizens it kills. Because the FBI statistics are that 1 out of every 10 people who commits a crime did not commit that crime. So that means there are 30 people sitting on Arkansas's death row right now. That means as many as 3 of them could be totally innocent. So you have to ask yourself this question. Is it worse to keep a guilty man or woman in prison for the rest of their life or to kill an innocent person? Which one do you think about more? But again, like I said, I can switch on this on any given day because I deal with a lot of victims' families too, and some of the crimes I've covered absolutely, pathetically inhumane. And when you hear about what some of these guys have done, we're probably better off with some of these people not being around. Okay, so again, and the thing that the only pushback I usually get when I talk about this case is the confession. So let's go back to the confession. Would anybody in here confess to a crime they didn't commit? Raise your hand if you would.
You don't know until you're in that situation.
Right. Well, here's the thing. Now, speaking to college students, they're going to keep their hands down. When I go to high schools, it's different. People will raise their hand. And I'll go, why? And it's always the same answer. Well, if they're asking me the question, then I must have had something to do with it. They looked me straight in the face and said it. They said they would do it to protect a family member. They said that a lot of times, and you get kids who, especially who have low IQs, they are stressed by the person trying to get them to talk to them. So they just say, okay, I did it, and they think that they're just going to clear it up later. They'll figure it out. So 2 years to the day, almost to the day after these 3 guys were released from prison, there's a girl named Jessica Williams, 11 years old, lived in Gosnell, or in the Gosnell area. She was out in her yard playing with her puppy, Rybach. She would put him in the basket of her bike, ride him around the yard. Dad is cooking dinner. He looks outside, sees them playing in the yard. Well, then he goes back to cooking. Well, a few minutes later, he looks out there and she's gone. And so he goes out there to look for her. Minutes turns into a half hour turns into an hour turns into several hours. And then all of a sudden, you've got a whole group of people out in the middle of the night looking for this missing girl, only 50 miles or less from where the West Memphis 3 were. The next morning, they find her body 11 miles from her house in a drainage ditch. How they found her, was her puppy had been taken as well. A couple of girls on ATVs saw this cute puppy walking down the side of this gravel road. They took the puppy back to the searchers. The searchers took the dog back to the spot. The dog took him right to her body. So within 24, 48 hours, something like that, Christopher South, her 17-year-old neighbor who rode the school bus with her, who had a low IQ, confessed to her murder. He even got a couple details right. From what I just told you about where they found her, do you think that there's a possibility you know a couple of those details right now? Of course you do. Found her in water. She could have drowned, right? So if you come in there and say, well, she drowned, then you would, that's a detail, that would be a major detail to get right. But it's not that hard. So Christopher Sal sits in jail for 8 months. I wrote about it. There was a gag order, so it's hard to get information. There was one question I kept asking the prosecutor, though, that made no sense to me at all. Christopher Sal didn't have a car. And Christopher Sal was out helping her dad look for her within a half an hour. He was a neighbor. He was with her dad. The prosecutor kept telling me this would be cleared up when we go to trial. This will be cleared up when we go to trial. I'm like, okay. 8 months fly by. Well, then all of a sudden, there was one piece of evidence found in her body. One sperm cell. They DNA test that sperm cell, and it doesn't belong to the guy that's in jail. It belonged to another neighbor named Freddie Sharp III, who had a criminal history, who had come home early from work that day. If it were not for that one sperm cell that they found, Christopher Sal would be on death row right now, and Freddie Sharp III would be walking the streets of Freeman. He claimed, Freddie Sharp did, his defense was how that sperm cell got in her or on her body was that he peed off the bridge that night, off the bridge where her body was found, and that's how the sperm cell got on.
Okay.
Yeah. So Christopher Sal got released after 8 months in prison. So anybody who doesn't think false confession is a real thing, it is a real thing. You can talk to any police. I've got police officer friends from here to the moon, and every one of them will tell you it is a thing.